3 people have already been executed in the first 3 weeks of 2023. Let's see what were the crimes they committed, as well as their last words and last meals. Amber McLaughlin, known as Scott McLaughlin, was born on January 13, 1973 and was executed on January 3, 2023 by the state of Missouri. Amber was an American transgender woman who was put to death for and killing her ex-girlfriend Beverly Gunter in 2003. McLaughlin was living as a man at the time of the crime, and while she was incarcerated, she changed her gender to female. She became the country's first openly transgender death row inmate. Scott McLaughlin continued to be McLaughlin's legal name, and both the execution warrant and the jail records listed her by this name. Because of a 1992 conviction of essay against a 14-year-old girl, McLaughlin was listed as a offender. According to court documents, McLaughlin would appear at the 45-year-old Gunter's suburban St. Louis workplace, occasionally hiding inside. Police officers often escorted Gunter to her vehicle after work. At that time, she obtained a restraining order against McLaughlin. The night of November 20, 2003, Gunter's neighbors reported her disappearance to the police. Officers arrived at the office building and discovered a blood trail and the broken knife handle close to her car. A day later, McLaughlin directed police to the spot where the body had been discarded in St. Louis, close to the Mississippi River. The jury was split evenly during McLaughlin's 2006 trial over the death penalty that would result in a life sentence in jail in the majority of American states. However, Missouri is one of just 2 states, the other being Indiana, where a judge has the authority to execute a person if the jury cannot agree on the appropriateness of the death penalty. McLaughlin's difficult background and mental health issues, which the jury was never told about during her trial, were mentioned in the clemency appeal. According to the petition, when she was a toddler, a foster provider put feces on her face and her adoptive father shocked her. It mentioned extreme depression that led to numerous attempts at suicide as a child and an adult. The petition also contained records citing diagnoses of gender dysphoria, a disorder that results in suffering and other symptoms when a person's gender identity and the sex they were assigned at birth diverge. However, according to her lawyer, Larry Comp, McLaughlin's sexual orientation was not the main emphasis of the clemency application. This clemency was denied. A spiritual advisor was on Amber McLaughlin's side as she talked softly while receiving the lethal injection of pentobarbital. McLaughlin took several deep breaths before closing her eyes, and she was declared deceased a short while afterwards. In a final statement that McLaughlin had, she said, "I'm sorry for what I did. I'm a loving and caring person." Her final meal had a cheeseburger, French fries, a strawberry milkshake, and a bag of peanut M&Ms. Robert Alan Fratta was born on February 22, 1957, and he was executed on January 10, 2023 by the state of Texas. Robert Fratta was given the death penalty in 1996 after a Harris County jury found him guilty of organizing a murder-for-hire scheme to eliminate his wife Farah despite his repeated claims of innocence. The former police officer and firefighter was attending church at the time, but authorities marked him as a suspect partly because it was claimed that before the crime he had reportedly searched for a hitman. Prosecutors claimed that in the end he recruited Joseph Pristash, who then hired a third person to carry out the murder. The death penalty was imposed on all 3 individuals. Before the execution started, Barry Brown, Fratta's spiritual advisor, prayed for him for roughly 3 minutes. As Fratta was shackled to the death chamber gurney, Brown called for prayers for hearts that have been broken, for people who grieved and those who will grieve in the days ahead. Brown had his prayer book on the pillow next to Fratta's head, with his right palm resting on Fratta's right hand. He prayed for God to be merciful to Bobby. When the warden inquired whether he had any closing remarks, Fratta responded, "No." Before all motion ceased, Fratta snored aloud 6 times. 2 days before his execution, he described his sentence as enlightening during an interview with the organization Death Penalty Action. It's been kind of an enlightening experience as far as I never gave any thought to the death penalty even though I was a police officer. Now that I'm going through it, I can understand how so ridiculously tormenting it is for the inmates to be put through this. To have you knowing the day and time and everything that you're going to die, and it's just prolonged, and everything that they put you through beforehand, this is torture. One of his sons, now 37 years old, as well as his former brother-in-law, were present at the execution. He did not look at them, not even for a second. Since he was executed in Texas, there was no special meal granted to Fratta. The state banned any special meal requests in September 2011 after condemned prisoner Lawrence Russell Brewer asked for a substantial and pricey farewell meal but refused to eat any of it, claiming that he was just not hungry. The other day, I found Fratta's pen pal profile. This is what it said. Hi, my name is Bobby and I'm on Texas death row. All my official appeals are over. I am looking for female friends, women companions, please. Any size and shape, but preferably young enough to be internet savvy. The attached photo is of me inside my cell on March 3rd, 2022 for my Overcomers graduation ceremony. I've also graduated from Bridges to Life and the Truth Project, and I am participating in 4 more courses to complete this first ever faith-based program on death row. I've written and published a book, written 6 short video skits thus far, and I'm working on a new venture you may find interesting. I'm easygoing, non-judgmental, open to any topic, and answer all questions honestly. You can read a lot more about me and my case. Just ask me for my social media information when you write me. Now I'm anxiously awaiting to hear from you and learn your interests and even anything you need or would like to vent about. I'm a good listener. To have a friend, I have to be a friend. Give me the opportunity to be your friend. Please be sure to provide your mailing address so I can reply. With love, Bobby. Scott James Eizember was born on January 10, 1961, and he was executed on January 12, 2023 by the state of Oklahoma. He was found guilty of the 2003 slayings of A.J. Cantrell, 76 years old, and Patsy Cantrell, 70 years old. Although Eizember was guilty, his lawyers maintained that his life still had value. In order to more conveniently monitor his ex-girlfriend who lived across the street, Eizember broke into the Cantrells' house. Before entering the house, Eizember waited for the couple to depart, and when they unexpectedly returned home, he killed them. Although defense lawyers said that Patsy was shot while AJ and Eizember fought over the weapon, the prosecutors claim he shot Patsy with a shotgun before using that shotgun to beat AJ to death. Eizember entered Catherine Smith's house shortly after the killings. He shot Smith's son in the back and then he attacked Smith's mother. Both people involved in the encounter survived and Eizember left the area. He wasn't discovered for some months. He was allegedly trying to get to Arkansas by threatening another couple with a gun and ordering them to drive him there. Before phoning the police, the husband was able to locate a gun he had stashed inside his car and shot Eizember 4 times. At 10:01 a.m., Eizember's execution started. The 3 drugs used in Oklahoma's current fatal injection procedure are midazolam for sedation, rocuronium bromide for stopping breathing, and potassium chloride for stopping the heart. In order to make eye contact with those witnesses who were present for him, Eizember raised his head a few times and nodded. 2 of them were lawyers, and one of them looked like a relative. 14 minutes after the execution procedure started, a doctor gave Eizember one more checkup and pronounced him dead at 10:15 a.m. Hood, his spiritual advisor, prayed over Eizember as he lay dying. In his last statement, Eizember said, "I told the truth. I cannot convince everyone that I told the truth, obviously. The court also said I told the truth. So for those people out there who don't seem to want to tell the truth, that's on them. That's on their head. I'm at peace. My conscience is clear completely. I love my children."
I apologize profusely to all the victims. I make no excuses. I belong in prison.
As he began to receive the drugs, he mouthed the words "I love you" towards his daughter who was in the witness room. His last meal was a medium rare ribeye steak and 2 sides of fries. There are 5 executions scheduled for the month of February. Wesley Lynn Ruiz, Leonard Sheldon Taylor, John Lezell Balentine, Richard Eugene Glossip, and Donald David Dillbeck. It remains to be seen how many of them will be carried out, as clemency and stays can be given at any moment. 4 people have been executed in February 2023. Let's see what were the crimes they committed, as well as their last words and last meals. Wesley Lynn Ruiz, 43 years old, executed on February 1, 2023, after 16 years on death row in the state of Texas. Ruiz was a drug dealer and gang member in the western Dallas metro region. He was 27 years old on Friday, March 22, 2007, when the DPD Murder Division reported that a 1996 Chevy Caprice with 4 doors, tinted windows, and chrome wheels was related to a horrifying crime that had occurred 2 days earlier. Detectives spotted the car on the Stemmons Freeway and asked for help. The car's driver, Ruiz, had an AR-15. As Mark Nix, 33 years old, responded to the report from his colleagues in the murder division, he observed the car driving along Mockingbird Lane to the west of the Dallas metropolitan region. The policeman approached, and just behind him was Wesley Lynn Ruiz's car. Ruiz tried to joke around with the on-Spurs DPD cops. He accelerated the Chevy Caprice unevenly before abruptly coming to a stop. The police were on the verge of ramming the car they were chasing many times at full speed. Every detail was filmed by patrol cameras. During the high-speed pursuit, Wesley Lynn Ruiz struck a curb, quickly lost control of the Chevy Caprice, and the car sped up a sloped field next to the road. The only police car that followed the gang member's vehicle was Officer Mark Nix. The blow and the angle of the slope caused Wesley Lynn Ruiz's car to become trapped. Patrolman Mark Nix fearlessly jumped out of his squad car and chased the Chevy Caprice. His life was suddenly taken by a hail of gunfire. Ruiz was also shot by the DPD officers, and in spite of all the gunshots, they were able to evacuate their badly wounded comrade from the crime scene. Tension rose as Ruiz kept shooting the officers with his AR-15. Paramedics from the Dallas Fire Department arrived promptly. Yet, despite their best efforts, the brave officer died while undergoing treatment in the emergency hospital. Before appearing in court, Wesley Lynn Ruiz sought medical attention for his injuries. He received the death penalty in Dallas County 1 year after murdering Officer Mark Nix. There was no final meal granted in Ruiz's case since he was on death row in Texas, where the last meal is no longer a privilege offered to the inmates. In a final statement, Ruiz said, "I would like to apologize to Mark and the Nix family. I hope this brings you closure. I want to say to all my family and friends around the world, thank you for supporting me. To my kids, stand tall and continue to make me proud. Don't worry about me. I'm going to be okay." Leonard Sheldon Taylor, 58 years old, executed on February 7, 2023, after 18 years on death row in the state of Missouri. On December 3, 2004, Angela Rowe and her 3 children's remains were discovered at Rowe's residence. The officers had to force their way inside the house through a bedroom window since it was locked. The air conditioner was set to 50 degrees and the television was on. Newspapers were in front of the yard and mail was in the mailbox. Rowe had sustained 4 gunshot wounds in total, 2 to her left arm, 1 to her chest, and 1 fatal one to her head, according to an autopsy. Tyrese Conley, age 5, Alexis Conley, age 10, and Akria Conley, age 6, all suffered fatal gunshot wounds to the head. The medical examiner determined that they had been dead for 2 to 3 weeks. In addition to being married to a California resident, Debreen Williams, Taylor was also in a relationship with Rowe at the time of her passing. Taylor called his brother on November 23rd and begged him for money. He also claimed to have killed Angela during a dispute and planned to kill the kids. He claimed that he turned on the air conditioner when asked how he was still in the house with the remains several days later. At the home of a different girlfriend in Madisonville, Kentucky, on December 9th, Taylor was arrested. Police were keeping an eye on the place and they saw him leave the house and he was laying on the floorboard of a car. A bloodstain on one of 3 pairs of Taylor's sunglasses that police found in his suitcase eventually matched Rowe's blood according to a DNA test. His last meal consisted in a seafood platter, cheeseburger, French fries, cheesecake, and vanilla ice cream. Once the 5 grams of pentobarbital were injected, Taylor kicked his feet and took 5 or 6 heavy breaths before ceasing all motion. Taylor's last word was, "Muslims live eternally in the hearts of our family and friends. That is your destiny, it is not your enemy. We anticipate meeting it. Peace." John Lezell Balentine, 54 years old, executed on February 8, 2023, after 26 years on death row in the state of Texas. Early on January 21, 1998, Balentine, carrying a .32 automatic pistol, climbed through a window to enter a home that he once lived in with Misty Kaler. Once inside, Balentine shot and killed 3 teens while they slept: Stephen Brady Watson, 15 years old, Kai Geyer, 15 years old, and Mark Kaler Jr., 17 years old, Misty's brother. Each victim received a gunshot wound to the head. Balentine confessed to the crimes after he was caught in Houston after escaping to New Mexico. In a recorded statement to police that was played at his 1999 trial, Balentine said that he left the home because there was a lot of drug use in there. He described how the brother of his then girlfriend planned to kill him first, so he sneaked inside the house and shot the teenagers one by one. A nearby resident called 911 after hearing a gunshot. When questioned by an officer who responded to the report while Balentine was 50 years away, strolling down the street, he gave a false identity. After finding an unfired .32 caliber bullet in Balentine's pocket, the police let him go because carrying a bullet wasn't illegal. After learning of the triple homicide later that day, it took the police 6 months to track down Balentine. No special final meal granted since he was on Texas death row. According to the Associated Press, Balentine appeared cheerful when witnesses entered the death chamber. He reportedly asked someone standing close to the gurney to remove the sheet covering his lower 2/3 of his body and give him a foot massage before laughing. Balentine made a brief statement after a short prayer from a spiritual advisor who was holding his left foot. "Yes, ma'am, I want to thank y'all. I love y'all for supporting me. I want to apologize for the wrong I did to y'all. Forgive me. I'm ready, ma'am." He turned to face 7 family members of his 3 victims, including the mothers of all 3, and apologized, saying, "I hope you can find in your heart to forgive me." Balentine snored loudly twice. He yawned and then drew 2 breaths as the lethal dose of pentobarbital started running through IV needles in his arms. The snores grew quieter before ceasing. By 6:36 p.m., 15 minutes after the medications had been injected, he was declared dead. Before leaving the execution room, witnesses exchanged high fives. These included Kaler's sister, who was once Balentine's girlfriend. Donald Dillbeck, 59 years old, executed on February 23rd after 32 years on death row in the state of Florida. Dillbeck was sentenced to death after being found guilty of killing Faye Lamb Van in a parking lot of a Tallahassee mall in 1990. In Gadsden County, where he was serving a life sentence for the 1979 murder of Lee County Deputy Dwight Lynn Hall, 31 years old, when he was only 15 years old, Dillbeck had fled from a work-release catering job. According to court records, he traveled to Tallahassee and attempted to carjack a vehicle. When Van, who was in the car waiting for her family, resisted being attacked, she was tragically stabbed. Dillbeck was the first prisoner executed in Florida since 2019 and the 100th inmate since 1975. 32 years after being given the death penalty by a judge, Donald Dillbeck awoke early on the last day of his life. According to Department of Prison spokeswoman Michelle Glady, he carried out his regular activities. She claimed that he had a meeting with his spiritual guide. His final meal was fried shrimp, mushrooms, onion rings, butter pecan ice cream, pecan pie, and a chocolate bar, which he consumed around 9:45 a.m. Dillbeck delivered his final remarks prior to being executed on Thursday, attacking Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and his policies. "I know I hurt people when I was young. I really messed up. But I know Ron DeSantis has done a lot worse. He's taken a lot from a lot of people. I speak for all men, women, and children. He's put his foot on our necks." Then he insulted DeSantis and others like him. Last month, on the same day he proposed amending Florida law to require a supermajority, Rather than an unanimous verdict from a jury, DeSantis signed Dillbeck's death warrant. There were 2 other people scheduled to be executed in February. Stanley Fitzpatrick's execution was reprieved. The new date of execution has been moved to April 16, 2026. Richard Glossip's execution was rescheduled for May 18, 2023. In March, there were 6 people initially scheduled to be executed, but again, one was reprieved and another one was rescheduled. At this time, Gary Green, Arthur Brown, Charles Lorraine, and Hannibal Canales Jr. are waiting for the capital punishment to be carried out next month. There were 7 people scheduled for execution in the month of March. 2 warrants were reprieved, 1 was rescheduled, 1 was stayed, and another one was withdrawn. 2 people ended up on the execution gurney. Gary Green, executed on March 7, 2023, after 13 years on death row in the state of Texas. Green was found guilty in 2010 of killing his wife Lovita Armstead and her daughter Jasmine Montgomery, who was 6 years old. Lovita Armstead was 32 years old and she had 3 children, Jerome, Jarrett, and Jasmine. She was a teacher and a young single mother when she met Gary Green, with whom she is said to have lived for a year or 2 prior to getting married in 2009. At 9:30 p.m., the police was called to Lovita's residence for concerns regarding a possible homicide. They found her lying face down on the floor of the master bedroom. She had been stabbed 30 times. Moreover, asphyxial signs and minor bruises on the side of her neck were discovered during an autopsy. Jasmine was found in the bathroom, her wrists and legs bound with duct tape. She was positioned next to the bathtub. A phone cord was also found wrapped around her ankles. Jasmine's autopsy revealed that she had drowned and this was the cause of death. She was also bleeding from the top of her skull. The ones that alerted the neighbors about what happened were Lovita's 2 sons, Jarrett and Jerome. Only hours after the double homicide, Gary Green, 38 years old at the time, agreed to turn himself in to the police after being convinced to do so by his mother. He confessed right away to killing Lovita and Jasmine. After only a few months of marriage, Lovita decided to file for divorce from Gary. Gary had left the house and she hoped to have their marriage annulled. On the day of the tragedy, he convinced Lovita to let him stay at the home. Gary acknowledged to the police that he had become upset due to the breakup. Gary confessed to the authorities, "My original intention was to kill all of us, since he thought they could all spend forever as a family." The 2 boys, who were then 9 and 12 years old, were picked up from the church after he took a shower. Gary even threatened to kill them both and stabbed Jarrett in the abdomen. The boys were able to convince him to let them live, though. Following that, Gary led them into the master bedroom where he showed them the bodies. He told them to call the police when he was gone. The boys quickly made their way to their neighbor's house after calling 911. Later, Gary tried to end his life by ingesting some narcotics, but he was caught. On the day of the killings, Armstead had written 2 letters to Green, telling him that although she loved him, she had to do what was best for her. In his own letter, which was angry and rambling, Green expressed the belief that Armstead and her children were involved in a plot against him. "You asked to see the monster, so here it is, the monster you made me. There will be 5 lives taken today, me being the 5th, Green wrote. Late in February 2023, Green's attorneys sent a letter to Dallas County District Attorney John Cruzot pleading with him to support their request to postpone Green's execution so that additional assessment of his intellectual disability could be conducted. The motion was dismissed. While doctors testified at his trial that Green likely had schizoaffective disorders, his lawyers contend his defense counsel did not fully look into how this condition impacted his life or what part it had in the murders. Jurors in Texas are permitted to take into account mitigating circumstances, such as mental illness, while determining whether to condemn someone to death. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals upheld Green's conviction and death sentence after he filed an appeal. Green was scheduled for execution on March 7th. Standing next to the gurney in the death chamber at the inmate's feet, Green's selected Buddhist spiritual advisor delivered a quick prayer. When the warden inquired as to if Green had any closing remarks, Green quickly apologized. His final statement was, "I apologize for all the harm I have caused you and your family," Green said, looking at relatives of his victims who watched through a window. "We ate together, we laughed and cried together as a family. I'm sorry I failed you. I took not one, but two people that we all loved, and I had to live with that while I was here. We were all one, and I broke that bond. I ask that you forgive me, not for me, but for y'all. I'm fixing to go home, and y'all are going to be here. I want to make sure you don't suffer. You have to forgive me to heal and move on." Prison staff had to utilize a vein in Green's right arm and a vein on top of his left hand in order to place the IV needles, which caused a little delay in the injection. Green was praising the Polanski unit staff, chaplains, and all the wonderful human beings at the Polanski unit, the jail that houses Texas condemned inmates, as the lethal dose of sedative pentobarbital started. He then exhaled numerous times quickly, which turned into snores. All motion ended after 9 snores. Many of the victim's family members hugged and sobbed. He was declared dead at 7:07 p.m. Montgomery, Jasmine's father, said he still has a close relationship with Lovita's 2 sons. He said both lead productive lives, and Jerome Armstead has a daughter who looks just like Jasmine. Arthur Brown, executed on March 9, 2023, after 31 years on death row in the state of Texas. On June 20, 1992, 4 people were shot and they died during a drug sale at a home in Houston, Texas. Marion Dudley, Arthur Brown Jr., and Tony Dunson went to Jose and Rachel Tovar's home to purchase 3 kilograms of cocaine when they made the decision to steal their drugs and cash. 6 people were bound and shot after the trio entered the home. When the police arrived, Jose Tovar, Jessica Quinones, who was 7 months pregnant, and Frank Farias had already passed away. One of the 3 survivors, Audrey Brown, eventually passed away in a hospital, bringing the number to a total of 4 murder victims. The remaining 2 survivors identified their attackers as Tony Dunson, Marion Dudley, and Arthur Brown Jr. After the killings, the murderers escaped the site. When they learned that the police were looking for them as potential murder suspects, they fled the town. They bought a Jeep Cherokee and convinced 2 women to drive them from Louisville, Kentucky to Louisville, Alabama. Once there, they used fake names to purchase tickets to Ohio. They departed from Columbus for the north. Despite the authorities finding a sports automobile they believed belonged to Dudley, no new information was revealed. The families of Dudley, Brown, and Dunson pleaded with them to come forward, but they thought the young men were innocent. On July 8, 1992, Dudley and Dunson were found inside a trailer near Fayetteville, North Carolina. Then, on October 23, 1992, Brown was taken into custody by members of the Tuscaloosa County Metro Homicide Unit in a Northport, Alabama apartment. Arthur Brown was found guilty of murder. He received the death sentence in November of 1993. Of the 3 criminals, he was the first to be found guilty. The second of the 3 criminals to be sentenced was Marion Butler Dudley, who received a capital murder conviction as well. On January 23, 1995, he received the death penalty verdict. After being found guilty of capital murder, Antoine Lamone Dunson received a life sentence. He will become eligible for parole on July 8, 2027. Both Rachel Tovar and Cortez named Brown as the person who attacked them in court, but according to documents, Tovar offered police in the hospital contradictory information, and Cortez has previously been unable to identify Brown from a lineup of pictures. Cortez again failed to recognize Brown from images in Dunson's subsequent trial. Guns thought to be connected to Brown and thought to have fired the deadly rounds were seized elsewhere, including on another guy after he died in a related attempt robbery at an Alabama drug dealer's home. The defense hypothesis at trial focused on Terrell Hill, identifying him as the most likely gunman. The science that was utilized to link the weapons to the projectiles discovered there was eventually debunked on appeals, but the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed Brown's punishment nonetheless. Without the ballistic evidence, the judge determined the jury would have most likely still found Brown guilty. The son of Rachel Tovar said his mother used the nickname for Hill when describing her attackers to police in the hospital during an interview that was withheld from the trial and kept a secret from Brown's lawyers until last year. She informed police in one interview she heard the nicknames Red and Squirt being used in the attack, and that her son would know them from opening the door. Brown insisted on his innocence up until the very end, claiming that the authorities had prevented him from using the evidence that would have shown he wasn't the murderer that night. Brown was scheduled for execution on March 9th. In his last statement on the gurney, he said, "What is occurring here tonight is not justice. It's murder of an innocent man for a murder that occurred in 1992. My co-defendant was executed in 2006, and if I'm innocent, he was innocent, and they killed an innocent man, and the state doesn't want the truth to come out. Tonight, Texas will kill a second innocent man for a murder that occurred in 1992. I have no further words." After receiving a fatal dose of pentobarbital, he reportedly took 2 long breaths before starting to snore. 7 minutes after receiving the medicine, at 6:37 p.m., Brown was pronounced dead. Both Gary Green and Arthur Brown were executed by the state of Texas, which means they were not granted a special final meal request. There are 3 people waiting for their execution in the month of April: Aaron Sanchez, Louis Gaskin, and Ivan Cantu. Then in May, we will see if Richard Glossop's capital punishment is carried out. There were 7 people scheduled to be executed in April. Ramael Salholt execution was stayed, 2 warrants were withdrawn in the cases of Andre Thomas and Ivan Cantu, 1 warrant expired in the case of Aaron Sanchez, David Sneed was resentenced to life in prison, the execution of Anthony Sanchez was rescheduled, and Louis Gaskin was executed on April 12th. Lis Bernard Gaskin was born on March 11, 1967. When he was just 22 years old, on the evening of December 20, 1989, Gaskin approached the Palm Coast house of 56-year-old Robert and 55-year-old Georgette Sturmfuls while armed with a .22 caliber rifle and dressed entirely in black to escape detection. Gaskin went around the house to the back window where Georgette was seated on the sofa and Robert was seated in a recliner. Gaskin pulled the trigger, killing Robert after 5 shots and wounding Georgette once. After the initial shot, Georgette was still alive, so Gaskin reloaded his weapon and shot her once in the head, killing her. A short while later, Gaskin arrived at Joseph and Mary Rector's house in a car. Gaskin shot his rifle into the house while the Rectors were watching television, hitting Joseph. Joseph was able to escape the space. When Gaskin broke the back window, Mary and Joseph took cover in a closet. As they fled to the car, Gaskin opened fire on them from the inside of the house. The Rectors were able to escape to a nearby hospital by getting in their car after all of the shots missed. After the residence was searched by the police, it became obvious that the offender had robbed it. When the murders were made public, Gaskin was almost instantly implicated because his girlfriend's cousin stated that Gaskin had been home shortly after the killings and claimed to be wrapping some presents. On December 30th, Gaskin was taken into custody. He first denied being involved in the killings. He subsequently admitted to the murders, though, and claimed they were totally random. In a recorded statement, he admitted to having murderous impulses. He directed law enforcement officers to a canal where he had stashed the wallet, credit cards, and other goods. Gaskin's response to the question of why he did it was, "God said no, the devil said yes. The grip of the devil over me was stronger than that of God." In addition, he admitted to the 1986 murder of a co-worker. The presents were found to come from the Sturmfuls property during a search of Gaskin's house. In July 1990, following a 2-month trial, Gaskin was judged responsible for 2 first-degree murders and 2 attempted murders. He was consequently handed 2 death sentences. From the time of his arrest until his death, which occurred 34 years later, he was detained at the Florida State Prison in Rayford. The execution date for Gaskin was set for April 12, 2023 by Governor Ron DeSantis on March 13th, and since Gaskin was on death row in the state of Florida, he did get to choose a last meal, and we'll see what he asked for in a second.
Louis Gaskin is scheduled to die by lethal injection Wednesday. He was convicted of murdering a Flagler County couple in 1989. Gaskin was dubbed the Ninja Killer after he broke into the home of Robert and Georgette Sturmfels while wearing all-black ninja clothing. He shot the couple with a rifle and stole several items, including a clock and video cassette recorder that he planned to give to his girlfriend as Christmas gifts. In the new appeal, Gaskin's attorney writes, because a trial judge and the recommending jury were denied the mitigation that was extant in Mr. Gaskin's case, the recommending jury and the trial court never focused on the unique circumstances of Mr. Gaskin. His deprivation, mental illness, and trauma he suffered was never heard, thus failing to meet the minimum constitutional requirements. This would be the second execution in Florida this year after a long pause dating back to 2019.
Before moving forward, please hit that subscribe button. YouTube analytics show that only 16.2% of you are subscribed and 83.8% are not. Thank you. According to Department of Corrections spokeswoman Kayla McLaughlin Smith at a press briefing, Gaskin ate his last meal on Wednesday at 9:45 a.m. after waking up at 4:45 a.m. The meal included barbecue pork ribs, pork and turkey neck, buffalo wings, shrimp fried rice, French fries, and water. Despite having his sister visit him on Wednesday, Gaskin did not see a spiritual advisor, according to Ms. McLaughlin Smith. The execution, which was scheduled to begin at 6 p.m., was carried out without any issues and was not attended by any family members of the victims. When asked if he had a final statement, Gaskin said, "Justice is not about the crime. It's not about the criminal. It's about the law." He then referred to the legal proceedings surrounding his case and the appeals and finished his statement saying, "Look at my case." At 6:02 p.m., Gaskin was administered the lethal combination of medicines which made him breathe heavily and caused his chest to rise and fall while covered in a white sheet. At 6:05 p.m., the prison warden went to see if Gaskin was still conscious. He remained silent. At 6:07 p.m., Gaskin's breathing seemed to stop. At 6:14 p.m., a doctor checked on Gaskin in the execution chamber before announcing his death a minute later.
I'm independent news services, but I'm going into two radio stations, one in Live Oak and one in Flagler Beach.
And you witnessed this. You've witnessed many of these before.
Yes,
Can you tell us how this one played out?
This one played out pretty good. I mean, it was, what's routine mean? He quietly went to sleep and he died.
Can you tell us some of the last words he said?
Basically, he referred to his case that didn't go wrong. He said that basically it's not about the crime or the criminal, it's about the law. And then he asked, the last four words of his life was, look at my case. In between, it was garbled and the three of us couldn't get it down.
Did he appear calm?
Oh, yes. Yeah, he just laid there all through the process. It didn't even look up at the witness list. And usually they'll lift their head and look around, but he didn't even do that.
I know you've covered many of these. Was there anything about this particular execution that stood out, or did this one just seem as textbook as many of the other ones that you've covered?
Well, there were some odd movements involved when they rendered the condemned unconscious. There were some movements that I've not observed before, but nothing out of the ordinary, showing any pain or any difficulty that I could professionally say.
How fast would you say it? I know you had notes in terms of from the time it started at about 6:03 when they administered, I guess, the first injection, till about around 6:15ish or so when they announced that he was.
A very short period of time. He was rendered unconscious, and by 6:08, 6:09, you could see that the drugs were taking effect, and he quickly died.
Did he try to say anything before they administered?
No, he was really quiet, laid back, didn't look around. He just laid there.
Is that unusual based on the other?
Well, most of the ones that I have observed in lethal executions, using the lethal means, they look up and see who's around and take some interest in there. Not all of them do, but most of them do. But he did nothing. He just laid there.
Who was inside the room?
You have the team warden, which is manning the phone. You had an FDLE officer too, my right, and then you had another officer to the left that was observing. So you had 3 in the room.
Was there anything holding him down?
Oh, yes. He was tightly secured. There was a sheet over him, so you don't see how he's tightly, but you look at the arms, and they're wrapped and he's strapped.
Did you find it unusual that, I mean, because I know usually in these cases, usually the victim's relatives, they will appear, I mean, they will witness the execution. But in this case, none of the victim's relatives were there. Was that a bit unusual?
No, but then again, this happened in Panama City, which is over 300 miles. You're talking about 30 years. So some of the people that were originally in the case may not be around now. So you're talking at the second layer of the victims' families.
I think you meant to say Flagler County.
Flagler County, yeah, I'm sorry. The Panama City is the next one. But still, it takes a lot of effort to wait 30 years or 25 years to see a man die that killed a relative of yours, whether it's a father, a son, a daughter, or a member. So, no, it's not unusual to see something like that to come out, and it's just the DOC to give the last press conference.
And I have to ask, how many years of this, of witnessing executions, have you done this? I mean, how many years?
My first case was Ted Bundy.
Since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976, Gaskin's death was the state's 101st execution. On Florida's death row, which is situated at Florida State Prison, some 40 miles southwest of Jacksonville, there are an additional 297 inmates. For the month of May, there are currently 2 scheduled executions, Richard Glossip and newly added Darel Barwick. There was only 1 person executed in the U.S. in the month of May. Darel Barwick was found guilty of murdering Rebecca Wendt and given the death penalty in 1986. Anne Wendt left her Panama City apartment early on March 31, 1986, to head to Fort Walton Beach. Anne's sister and roommate Rebecca Wendt stayed at the apartment building and lounged outside until around 11:45 a.m. Around 12:30 p.m., a different apartment complex resident, who was also outside tanning, noticed a man wandering around the property. The witness claimed she observed the man approach the Wendt's flat and then leave their building and enter the woods. She later identified him as Darel Barwick. Rebecca's body was discovered in the bathroom of the flat on the evening of March 31st when her sister came home. It was covered in a blanket. Bloody footprints and fingerprints were seen throughout the flat by the investigators who were called to the location, as well as the victim's wallet and purse. Rebecca had been stabbed multiple times and her swimming suit was displaced. She suffered 37 stab wounds to her upper body, as well as several defensive wounds to her hands, according to an autopsy. The medical examiner came to the conclusion that the neck, chest, and abdominal wounds were most probably fatal ones, and that death would have happened 3 to 10 minutes after the initial stabbing.
The Bay County Sheriff's Office and the Springfield Police Department are looking into Monday evening's stabbing death of 24-year-old Rebecca Wendt. Wendt was visiting her sister and was staying in her sister's apartment on Russ Lake Drive. Sheriff Lavelle Pitts speculates that Wendt was sunbathing during the afternoon hours, and it's possible the murder wasn't discovered for some time.
It appeared that some intruder come into the house. Possibly the girl was laying out in the yard, sunning, and someone could have come in when she started back in the house, and it was evident that a tremendous struggle took place. There was evidence of that she fought, all over the house. And that's about all we can tell you at this time. We don't know how long that she was dead, before members of her family come in and found her.
Crime scene investigators were on the scene this morning to continue the search for evidence. Sheriff Pitts is also asking the public's help in this case.
The victim's blanket had a genetic material stain on it, which a crime lab analyst discovered, despite the examiner finding that there was no assay on the victim. After the genetic material was examined and compared with Barwick's blood, it was concluded that Barwick fit within 2% of the population that may have generated the stain. Barwick first told detectives he had nothing to do with Rebecca's murder. However, he admitted to committing the act after being apprehended on April 15th. He claimed that following his observation of Rebecca sunbathing, he drove back to his residence, parked the car, got a knife, and then made his way back to the apartment building where he had first seen Rebecca. He followed her into her apartment after passing her 3 times. Rebecca fought, and Barwick said he was merely trying to steal something. However, when she struggled, he lost control and stabbed her. As the two wrestled and went to the ground, Rebecca was still being stabbed, according to Barwick. Darel Barwick was born on September 29, 1966, and he was just 19 years and a half when he committed this crime. He had previously been imprisoned for essay and burglary, and he had been out of prison for barely 3 months when he murdered Rebecca Wendt.
Tuesday afternoon, Darryl Brian Barwick was arrested for the stabbing death of Rebecca Wendt. This morning, he was officially charged with first-degree murder and armed burglary. Circuit Judge Don T. Sermons read the charges.
The acting states the defendant entered the residence of Rebecca Wendt and while armed with a knife did assault the victim by stabbing her 38 times.
Also present for first appearance was Assistant State Attorney Harry Harper. Sheriff Lavelle Pitts has praised the cooperation that his department received from investigators from the State Attorney's Office. Frank McKeithen, the chief case officer for the Barwick arrest, was in court on behalf of the Sheriff's Department. Judge Sermons appointed public defender Mike Stone to represent Barwick. Barwick was ordered held without bail and will return to offer a plea in the case on June 18th.
102 people have been put to death in Florida since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. Governor Ron DeSantis signed the death warrant for Barwick last month. His execution was the 3rd one planned for Florida this year, following a pause that began in 2019. Barwick's lawyers argue that the execution should be put on hold due to his ongoing mental illness and intellectual incapacity in their last appeal to the Florida Supreme Court. The appeal was denied.
Death row inmate Darryl Barwick is down to his last appeal in his attempt to avoid execution tomorrow night. Friday, his attorneys appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court asking for the stay of execution. They cited what they called the state's failure to give Barwick a fair chance at clemency. That argument has already been rejected by several other state and federal courts. The appeal came on the same day that the Florida Supreme Court rejected Barwick's motion for a stay of execution. Not only did justices affirm the circuit court's conviction and death sentence, but they also said they would not consider any more of Barwick's appeals. Barwick killed 24-year-old Rebecca Wendt at a Russ Lake apartment unit back in September of '86. He was 19 years old at the time. The jury at his 1987 trial recommended the death penalty, as did the jury at his '92 retrial. Governor Ron DeSantis signed Barwick's death warrant on April the 3rd. Barring a last-minute stay, Barwick will die by lethal ejection at 6 o'clock Eastern Time tomorrow night. He'll be the first Bay County death row inmate to be put to death since capital punishment was reinstated in Florida all the way back in 1976.
According to Florida Department of Corrections officials, Darel Barwick woke up at 4:15 in the morning and he was in good spirits. His last meal was at 9:15 a.m. and he chose to eat fried chicken, mac and cheese, black-eyed peas, rice, and cornbread, which he paired with a cola. For dessert, he chose strawberry ice cream. Before his scheduled execution at 6 o'clock in the evening, jail officials reported that although Barwick had not interacted with his family members in person, he had recently spoken to them on the phone. According to officials, no family members of the victim were scheduled to attend the execution. Before being given a lethal injection, Darel Barwick made a brief statement. He was already tied to a table and covered with a sheet in the execution chamber when the screen was raised. The intravenous lines were already in place on his left arm, and only the face and the arm were visible. His last words were, "It's time to apologize to the victim's family and to my family. I can't explain why I did what I did. And another thing I would like to say, the state of Florida needs to show some kind of compassion and kindness for each other with so many kids in prison. There are 14 and 15-year-olds serving life sentences." In addition to the 4 press representatives and employees of the Florida Department of Corrections, there were 17 official witnesses present. After he was done speaking, a staff member declared that the preparatory stage of the execution was over and that the execution phase was about to start. At 6:02 p.m., the lethal mix of 3 drugs, a sedative, a paralytic, and the medication to stop his heart, began to be administered. Throughout the process, he kept his eyes open. Barwick's left arm began to twitch shortly after he started breathing heavily for several minutes, with his chest visibly rising and falling. Barwick was approached by employees at 6:06 but remained silent despite keeping his eyes open. A member of the execution team's medical staff declared Barwick dead at 6:14 p.m. after only 12 minutes.
The sentence of the state of Florida versus Darryl Brian Barwick was carried out at 6:14 p.m. The execution took place without incident.
Up until Wednesday, the state of Florida had executed 101 death row inmates. Wednesday evening, 56-year-old Darel Barwick became number 102, executed by lethal injection. The U.S. Supreme Court rejected his last hope for a stay of execution earlier in the day. Prison officials say Barwick was calm and in good spirits around 9:15 Wednesday morning when he received his last meal. Afterward, he consulted with a spiritual leader, then waited. Around 5 o'clock, the execution process began, with Barwick being prepared, strapped to a table, and transported to the execution chamber. At 6 o'clock, nearly 3 dozen official witnesses, media, and Department of Corrections officials gathered in a viewing room to watch the state carry out the sentence. At 6:02, the execution team began the lethal injection process. 5 minutes later, Barwick slipped into unconsciousness. At 6:14, a medical professional pronounced him dead. Rebecca Went's family did not attend the execution. None of the witnesses had a personal connection to the case. From the time they entered the room until the time they left, no one said a word, no one looked away, and no one displayed any emotions.
This is a case where there has never been a doubt about the defendant's guilt. Not one, but 2 juries found the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt and recommended that he be sentenced to death. Unfortunately, it took 37 years from the time of the crime for that punishment to be carried out in this case. We appreciate the tireless efforts of the Attorney General's office and Governor DeSantis' office to obtain justice for the victim and her family.
The governor of Florida dropped the requirement for recommending the death penalty in the state this month, allowing jurors to do so without unanimous consent. Only 8 out of the 12 jurors must propose the death penalty under new laws approved by the legislature. Additionally, DeSantis signed a bill this week that makes essay of a kid under the age of 12 a crime punishable by the death sentence. Both bills received public support from the governor. Another person that was scheduled to be executed in May was Richard Glossip, and I was constantly checking for updates regarding his case. Just last week, the Supreme Court decided to block his execution. The state's Attorney General, Mr. Drummond, made a remarkable decision in his letter, saying that the state had come to the difficult but essential conclusion that Glossip's capital conviction is unsustainable and a new trial is imperative. The stay issued by the Supreme Court will remain in place while the justices decide whether to hear Glossip's appeal, and if they do, until they decide its outcome. The case of Richard Glossip has been controversial to say the least. Barry Van Trees was killed by Justin Sneed on January 7, 1997, with a baseball bat. The murder took place at the Best Budget Inn in Oklahoma City, where Glossip was the manager, Sneed was the maintenance worker, and Van Trees was the hotel's owner. Sneed confessed and admitted to the police that Glossip had given him the order to kill the victim in exchange for being spared the death penalty. Glossip resisted taking a plea deal because he claimed he was truly innocent. A jury in Oklahoma found Glossip guilty of the murder in July 1998, and they also gave him the death penalty. The conviction was overturned in 2001 by the unanimous Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals, which described the prosecution's evidence as very poor and said Glossip had had unconstitutionally inadequate legal representation. A second Oklahoma jury found Glossip guilty of the murder in August 2004 and gave him the death penalty again. Glossip claimed that his defense attorney had resigned because of intimidation by the prosecution. However, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the death penalty in April 2007, with 2 judges voting in favor, 1 judge specifically concurring, and 2 judges against. Sister Helen Prejean advocated for Glossip, but she was unsuccessful in persuading the Clemency Board to take into account letters from Sneed's relatives who think Sneed was lying. Glossip was almost entirely convicted based on Sneed's testimony, which he used to avoid the death penalty himself. I'm curious to know, what do you guys think about Richard Glossip's case? Was he really wrongfully convicted, or did he actually plan the murder of his former boss? There are no other death warrants signed for the month of May, but for the month of June there are 2 people waiting to be executed. These people are Alabama death row inmate James Barber and Missouri prisoner Michael Tisius. There were 2 people executed in the month of June. Michael Tisius, Missouri, 23 years on death row. Michael Tisius and Roy Vance shared a cell at the Randolph County Jail in Huntsville, Missouri at the beginning of June 2000. Tisius received a 30-day sentence, and Vance informed him that he would likely spend the next 50 years behind bars. Tisius and Vance explored several plans where Tisius would go back to prison to help Vance in escaping as a result. One of those schemes called for Tisius to bring a gun to the jail, subdue the guards, and hand it to Vance, who would take over and free all of the prisoners. The Randolph County Jail was a 2-story brick structure that had previously been a residence. When a guest rang the doorbell, the officers could remotely unlock the jail's front door, which was always locked. The dispatch room where the officers were stationed was to the right of a counter in the small foyer at the front door. The jail cells were located in the back of the building along a hallway from the dispatch center. Release day for Tisius was June 13, 2000. He made contact with Tracy Bullington, Vance's girlfriend, soon after he was freed, and she informed him that she was game for carrying out the escape scheme. In order to pick up Tisius and return him to Macon, Bullington traveled from Macon to Columbia 4 days later with Heather Douglas. Tisius and Bullington stayed at Douglas's house for 4 or 5 days. Douglas overheard the 2 discussing various escape plans for Vance while they were being transported to Columbia, including the thought of confining the jailers to a cell. They stated that they were joking to Douglas. Douglas testified that she overheard Tisius and Bullington claim to be on a mission in the days that followed, but they did not go into further details. Additionally, Tisius and Bullington mentioned giving cigarettes to Vance while he was in jail and obtaining information from a stupid deputy. Other times, when Douglas entered the room, they would all suddenly stop speaking. In addition, Douglas testified that she observed a gun in Bullington's car and that Tisius and Bullington kept a stereo, clothes, and camping equipment there. Tisius and Bullington made many trips to the jail starting on June 17, 2000, and they did so over a period of several days. On one of those mornings, they were allowed in through the front door and handed a pack of cigarettes to an on-duty police officer, asking for them to be given to Vance. A couple of days later, Tisius and Bullington visited the jail claiming to bring Vance some socks and inquired about his scheduled court appearance. According to Bullington's testimony, each delivery conveyed to Vance specific information, such as the news that Tisius had arrived in town or the fact that the jailbreak would not take place the same night as the delivery. Tisius kept a .22 caliber pistol Bullington had taken from her parents' house in the front of his jeans during several of those visits. Tisius had made an attempt to obtain a larger firearm than the one Bullington had taken. One officer testified that Tisius and Bullington were acting really funny, uneasy, and erratically on the night of one of their visits, prompting him to write a police report about it. On June 21, 2000, when the 2 were traveling on rural roads, Tisius fired the gun through Bullington's car window as a test. Later that evening, as they planned to free Vance from prison, the 2 drove about while listening to a song with the refrain, "Mo Murder." Tisius played the song repeatedly while winding the cassette. It was about time, Tisius said to Bullington, and he would go in and just start shooting, and that he had to do what he had to do. He added that he would enter the jail in a blaze of glory. Tisius and Bullington returned to the Randolph County Jail around 12:15 a.m. on June 22nd and rang the doorbell to be let in. Once more, Tisius hid the gun in his jeans. The 2 claimed to be delivering cigarettes to Vance when speaking with the police. Jason Acton and Leon Egley were the 2 officers in attendance. For almost 10 minutes, Tisius chatted casually with one of the cops, telling him about his plans for the future and how he was doing. According to Bullington's testimony, she was about to inform Tisius she was prepared to leave at that time, but she stopped when she saw him standing with a revolver drawn next to his leg. Acton was instantly killed when Tisius raised his arm while holding a pistol at his side and fired from 2 to 4 feet away, striking him above the left eye. About 10 seconds after killing Acton, Egley started to approach Tisius. Tisius fired 1 or more shots at Egley, causing the officer to fall to the ground. Both cops had no weapons. Tisius then proceeded to Vance's cell after obtaining several keys from the dispatch room. He went back to the dispatch area to look for more keys after being unable to access the cell. Egley seized Balington's legs as he was laying on the ground, and Tisius fired 5 more shots at him from a distance of 2 or 3 feet away while he was in the dispatch area. Egley was shot 5 times, 3 times in the forehead, once in the right cheek, and once in the upper right shoulder. Egley was discovered by authorities in a pool of blood, gasping for air and making gurgling noises. He passed away shortly after. Balington and Tisius took off in her car. On his way out of town, Tisius flung the keys from the dispatch area out of the window of the car. Balington fired the weapon while driving across a bridge on Highway 36. Her vehicle broke down after the two traveled from St. Joseph and across the border into Kansas. The keys and revolver were found after the two were detained by the police later that day. Tisius provided verbal and written admissions to the killings after signing a waiver of his Miranda rights. Tisius' theory during the trial was that he was primarily responsible for second-degree murders. Despite his admission that he killed the two officers by shooting them, he claimed he did so accidentally. On June 6th, at the state jail in Bonne Terre, 42-year-old Michael Tisius received a lethal injection of pentobarbital and was pronounced dead at 10 minutes past 6. As the medication was given, Tisius took a few deep breaths before going silent. Melissa Potts Bowers, his spiritual guide, was present in the room with him. What they were saying to each other is unknown due to the soundproof glass that surrounds the execution chamber. Tisius made the last written statement in which he apologized for his actions and said he made a sincere effort to become a better man. His last statement read, "I am holding tightly to my faith. It's all I have to take with me. I am sorry it had to come to this in this way. I wish I could have made things right while I was still here. I really did try to become a better man. I really tried hard to give as much as I could to as many as I could. I tried to forgive others as I wish to be forgiven, and I pray that God will forgive those who condemned me, just as he forgave those who condemned him. I am sorry, and not because I am at the end, but because I truly am sorry, and I need to say that I love you, Truffle. Seacrest out." His last meal before the execution reportedly consisted of 2 bacon cheeseburgers, curly fries, regular fries, and a chocolate milkshake. Dwayne Owen, Florida, 38 years on death row. A jury found Owen guilty of stabbing and killing 14-year-old Delray Beach babysitter Karen Slattery in 1984, who was watching over 2 toddlers at the time. Just 1 year later, a judge sentenced Owen to death once more for sneaking into Georgiana Warden Bocaraton's house and killing her with a hammer. Additionally, Mrs. Warden was essayed. On the morning of May 29, 1984, as they were getting ready for school, her kids discovered the body. On May 30, 1984, Owen was taken into custody on separate charges. He confessed to this murder during the course of the subsequent week's worth of questioning. In the victim's residence, a library book bearing Owen's prints was also discovered. Owen allegedly attacked 2 additional ladies in Palm Beach County who had survived. In addition to his death sentence, he was given 6 life terms for these crimes. Just before and after Owen turned 23 years old, all 4 attacks took place. Owen's attorneys contended that he should not be executed on the grounds of insanity because he suffers from schizophrenia. Last week, though, the Texas Supreme Court dismissed Owen's most recent appeal, and on Wednesday, the U.S. Supreme Court also dismissed it, stating that even though Owen has mental health concerns, they do not prevent him from being put to death because he is aware of the penalty for his actions. According to state-employed psychiatrists, he displayed no signs of the condition during the conversation. In addition, the defense claimed that Owen suffers from gender dysphoria and dementia, both of which the court's investigators could find no evidence of. According to court documents, Owen's mother passed away when he was just 11 years old, and as a child, he was severely physically abused and essayed. After 38 years on death row, Owen was executed the evening of June 15, 2023 by lethal injection. He woke up at 7 a.m. and had his last meal at 9:45 a.m. It was a bacon cheeseburger without a bun, onion rings, strawberries, a vanilla milkshake, and coffee. Corrections officials allowed the meals to cost up to $40. Some family members of the victims witnessed the execution, but the Department of Corrections officials would not disclose who they were. Owen received no visits from friends or family. When asked in the death chamber minutes before he died whether he had any last words, he said no. He did leave a last statement which read, "I have transcended space and time. I have seen the visions of the crowd. My energy and particles will transform ad infinitum. I will live on. I am Tula, 13. The three-drug mixture used for lethal injections in Florida consists of a sedative, a paralytic, and a heart-stopping drug. The first is etomidate, an anesthetic drug. The second, pancuronium bromide, which paralyzes the lungs. The third drug is potassium chloride, which stops the heart. A saline solution ensures the drugs are pushed through the system." There were 2 people executed in the month of July in the United States. Jemaine Canon, 51 years old, 26 years on death row in the state of Oklahoma. Cannon was found guilty of killing Sharonda White Clark in her Tulsa, Oklahoma residence on February 3, 1995. For the past 26 years, he has been waiting for his execution. Cannon claimed that as a child, he suffered from physical, mental, and emotional abuse. He was given a 15-year prison sentence in 1991 for attacking an 18-year-old girl and breaking her skull. He was assigned to a minimum security work camp in southwest Oklahoma to serve that sentence. By taking a car from the job site, he was able to escape prison on January 13th. The car was discovered abandoned near Tulsa, Oklahoma a few days later. The body of Sharonda Clark, Cannon's girlfriend, was discovered in her apartment 2 weeks later, on February 5, 1995. Later, it was discovered that she had passed away 2 days earlier. The day after Sharonda died, Cannon escaped to Flint, Michigan. Prior to being detained, he admitted to his mother that Sharonda was dead, saying she had attacked him and fallen onto the knife. Later, when speaking with authorities, Cannon acknowledged stabbing Sharonda as a result of her attacking him and making him lose his temper. He was apprehended with no apparent defensive wounds on his body. On April 11, 1996, a jury found Cannon guilty and gave him the death penalty. The Oklahoma Board of Pardons and Paroles denied Cannon's clemency request in June 2023. The execution date for Cannon was initially set on March 9, 2023. His execution was, however, postponed to July 20, 2023, at the request of Oklahoma Attorney General Gentner Drummond. Drummond asked for numerous execution dates to be changed so that there would be more time between executions, including Cannon's. The Oklahoma Department of Corrections is currently understaffed, and the execution preparation process apparently takes a lot of time. Clemency was denied by the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board. Cannon and his lawyer argued that he ought to be awarded clemency since he committed the murder while acting in self-defense. The argument was dismissed. At the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Cannon received a lethal injection at 10:01 a.m., and 12 minutes later he was declared dead. It was Oklahoma's second execution of the year and its 9th overall since the state started using lethal injections again in 2021. His last words were, "Yes, I confess with my mouth and believe in my heart that God raised Jesus from the dead. Therefore, I am saved. Thank you." For his last meal, he chose to have a Vernon's ginger ale, chicken breast, sliced brisket, seasoned fries, fried okra, sweet and smoky beans, and cherry pie.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to start by saying thank you first and foremost to the Attorney General and his entire office, the DOC, the Tulsa Police Department, and all the past and present individuals that played a huge role in supporting myself and my family in this case the entire time. If it weren't for you all, especially your office, the Attorney General's office, support and hope would have been lost along the way. However, the constant support and reassurance and relationships that have been built with that particular office and the individuals throughout these last 17 years of my life has played a huge role in today and being comforted with what was to come forward. So thank you with the most sincerest part of my being that I can offer to you all. That's all that I have. I don't necessarily want to use the word justice, but I do feel like justice was rendered in the way that it should have been. There's no justice for replacing a life or taking a life. However, it was what was necessary, if that makes sense. This is my aunt.
The aunt, yes.
This is my mother's sister.
I'm the youngest. Shaya, S-H-A-Y-A. Duncan.
The process, the DOC did a wonderful job. At no point in time did I feel uncomfortable. At no point in time did I feel as if there was any threat or just anything was going wrong or unpredictable. In my opinion, he died in a very favorable way that a lot of people in good health would request or prefer to die when it is their time. He died in his peace. Unfortunately, my mom did not have that opportunity. He was allowed to say his goodbyes, read lips, give thumbs up. It was peaceful for him. He hasn't shown any remorse in 28 years. Not at one point in time has he offered a sincere apology. Not at one point in time has he offered a sincere apology to the family or just repenting what he's actually done for himself. So I didn't expect it. It was the reaction that we got through his last words was definitely selfish, and that's been how he's been the entire time. So it was expected for myself. I don't know how you felt.
The same. I really didn't expect an apology. He hasn't been apologetic throughout the whole thing. So his last words was not a surprise.
She was not defeated. She may not be here in flesh. However, she is still here within me, within her sister, within our family. So I would definitely say I'm your cheerleader. I'm glad she was my cheerleader to tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, something's still not right. He's still here. You still have a fight. So we did it. We can now easily breathe at ease. It's unfair to feel as if a family has justice or feel content or feel okay because a individual is in prison. It's just unfair. It's unfair to feel that that's okay or that's the end of the line. In our particular case, he had already escaped once before, so it doesn't put us at ease to know that he's behind a set of bars again. To know that this is finally done, there's no more escaping, there's no more possibilities. That's what puts us at ease, and I think I speak for not only myself, but also for those other surviving victims.
My name is Sean Murphy. I'm a reporter for the Associated Press here in Oklahoma City. Today's execution had, there were 14 witnesses, including the 5 of us media witnesses. There were the Attorney General, the former Tulsa County prosecutor, Dr. Urban Yin, and then a couple people I didn't know were all in the witness room with us. The curtains lifted right promptly at 10 a.m. The death warrant was read, I believe, by the warden. Mr. Cannon was asked if he had any last words. His last words were, "Yes, I confess with my mouth and believe in my heart that God raised Jesus from the dead. Therefore, I am saved. Thank you." The execution began at 10:01. Mr. Cannon flashed a thumbs up to his supporters, lifted his head, and looked smilingly over at his, I believe, family members and member of his legal team. A pastor was inside the chamber with him, had his hand on his foot. He appeared to stop talking, although the mic was off. You could see his lips moving, but he appeared to stop talking at 10:03. One of his family members, I believe, choked back some tears. He was at 10:06. The member of the medical team came in and shook Mr. Cannon, talked to him. There was no response, and he was declared unconscious at 10:07. He was still breathing at that point. His chest stopped moving, and he appeared to stop breathing at 10:09. And the doctor entered at 10:12, used a stethoscope, checked for a pulse, checked his eyes for dilation, and he was declared dead at 10:13. And the curtain was lowered, and that was it.
And my name is J.C. Hallman. I write for the Baffler magazine and a number of other outlets. I would add only that the breathing that Mr. Cannon was demonstrating after he appeared to be unconscious appeared quite stuttering. I wouldn't call it labored breathing. It didn't look like he was trying to breathe or he was making a conscious effort to breathe, but there was a stuttering effect. The sound was turned back on at one moment, very briefly, and we could hear a kind of rattling snore, I almost want to say, something close to that. That was very brief, and the sound was turned off again. After his final words, as Sean stated them, there was an exchange with the pastor who was in the room. The pastor was reciting passages, and there was some kind of response that Mr. Cannon was providing. And over time, after the breathing appeared to stop, his complexion drained markedly. And all of that is happening in the time frame that Sean laid out minute by minute.
Hello, my name is Erin Christie. I'm from KJRH in Tulsa. I don't have a lot more to add other than these gentlemen, what they had to say, other than this is my first time to witness an execution, and it seemed like a peaceful process, and from speaking with my colleagues afterwards, this particular one seemed to be a quicker process. He closed his eyes made fairly quickly as compared to some other experiences other people had. As far as the audience goes, the only other thing that I have to add is the one gentleman that Sean mentioned got choked up. When it was time to go, we're not allowed to speak, and he did get up and did seem very upset and agitated, almost as if he wanted to show some emotion, but he kept his composure and sat back down. But I really think they wrapped it up pretty well.
I'm Scott Martin with Fox 23 out of Tulsa. Myself too, this was my first execution to witness, and everyone did hit everything on point. Add a couple of things. As soon as that curtain opened, he was immediately making eye contact to see who was there for him. And as far as the smiling, it was almost like a half smile kind of smile thing, kind of like he said, as far as he was trying to kind of comfort who was there watching him.
I'm Reagan Ledbetter with Channel 6 in Tulsa. This is my second one that I've witnessed. I have one to compare it to, and I would kind of say what they've said. It seemed very quick, just minutes after the curtain raised, he closed his eyes. I would say that when the curtain raised, I would kind of call it a half smile, as Scott said. He kind of looked down the line, but when he saw that guy that Aaron had talked about that jumped up, it was like he went down the line, saw his legal team, saw some family members that he may have invited, and then all of a sudden it was like, what are you doing here? I don't know if it was somebody, a distant relative that he noticed and saw that reaction, but I noticed he had his hand or his thumb up for the first couple of minutes, even when his eyes were closed, and then it just kind of went down and kept that clenched fist for the rest of the time. When his advisor was praying over him, all of a sudden he starts talking, and I thought I saw him mouth, like, I love you, brother, to his advisor, is what it looked like, and he's kind of just praying aloud before he closed his eyes. But he seemed to be asleep shortly after this whole process started.
James Barber, 64 years old, 19 years on death row in the state of Alabama. Barber was convicted for murdering Dorothy Epps, a 75-year-old lady who he had known for the majority of his life. He was in fact her handyman and was very often in contact with the victim before deciding to rob her. At the time, her husband was out of town and he told the neighbors to keep an eye on his wife in case she needed anything. Barber killed Dorothy with a hammer and his palm print was found at the crime scene. Due to issues with Alabama's previous 3 lethal injections, Barber's attorneys have urged the court to prevent his execution, arguing that doing so will violate the 8th Amendment bar on cruel and unusual punishments. Due to difficulties gaining access to Joe Nathan James Jr.'s veins, the execution took longer than 3 hours to be carried out in July 2022. Also, due to the execution team's inability to make IV connections, the 2 executions that had been set since then, Alan Eugene Miller's in September and Kenneth Eugene Smith's in November, were cancelled in the middle of the process. James' legal team claims that the amount of drugs and alcohol he had in his system at the time of the murder left him so impaired that he was unable to develop the intent necessary for first-degree murder. The appeal was turned down. At the time of her passing, Dorothy Epps, who was 75 years old, weighed around 100 pounds and stood 5 feet 5 inches tall. The Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences, Dr. Joseph Embry, a medical examiner, gave testimony regarding the results of the autopsy he conducted on May 23, 2001. His examination of the victim's body revealed injuries that he divided into several categories, including bruises, cuts, and fractures, bleeding over the brain, numerous wounds in the hands and arms, rib fractures, and bruising in the front of her body. She also had bruising and rib fractures in the back. Injuries to the neck, mouth, and left eye were caused by strikes to Mrs. Epps by James Barber's fists, and her tongue was bruised and wounded by a blow or blows to the head, according to Dr. Embry. There were also 7 fractures in the head or skull. Dr. Embry discovered many defensive wounds that Mrs. Epps had undoubtedly sustained while attempting to deflect the strikes. She had bruises on the backs of her hands, as well as bruising on her left palm and forearm. She experienced lower chest and abdominal bruises in addition to rib fractures in those locations. Mrs. Epps' wounds and injuries were consistent with those that would have been caused by a claw hammer. By a vote of 2-1, a 3-judge panel rejected Barber's appeal on Wednesday, finding that he had not provided sufficient evidence to support his allegation that his execution would qualify as cruel and unusual. His legal team submitted a request expressing concerns regarding the humanity of the procedure, considering the last 3 botched executions that took place in Alabama. The state had a 30-hour window to execute Barber, which began at midnight local time on July 20th and expired at 6 a.m. local time on July 21st. Because Barber was waiting for the Supreme Court decision of whether a stay would be granted after his new appeal, there was significant delay in the execution. The Supreme Court denied the request to halt the procedures. Barber received 6 phone calls and 10 visitors the day before his execution. On his last day, he received 22 visitors, made 2 phone calls, skipped breakfast, and instead consumed snacks and drinks. For his last meal, he chose loaded hash browns, Western omelette, spicy sausage, and white toast. After a long wait, members of the press were allowed to enter the witness chamber at 1:22 a.m. The curtains were opened at 1:30 a.m. At 1:33 a.m., Barber said his last words. To the family of Dorothy Epps, he said, "I love them. I am sorry for what happened. I truly am. I can't apologize anymore. No words would fit." To Alabama Governor Kay Ivey and those preparing the execution, he said, "I forgive you for what you are about to do." At 1:37 a.m., Barber smiled, then his eyes closed slowly. His breathing became labored, and it continued until 1:41, when it stopped. At 1:47 a.m., the curtain was closed, and at 1:56, he was declared dead.
Hi, good evening. By order of the Alabama Supreme Court, tonight the state of Alabama carried out the execution of James Barber by lethal injection. at William C. Holden Prison. Barber was executed for the 2001 capital murder of Dorothy Epps in Madison County. Barber did make a verbal statement. He was pronounced dead at 1:56 a.m. Are there any questions from the meeting?
He said he did, or he didn't make a statement?
He did make a statement.
Do you have what that statement is?
No, sir. He made a verbal statement. You can get with your other media witnesses and give them see what the context of his statement was.
Commissioner, about how long did y'all try to obtain venous access? That's been an issue in the last 3 executions.
There was 3 sticks in 6 minutes.
How many sticks did you need? How many IVs did you need to have in him too?
We had 2, so there was 3 sticks in 6 minutes.
As I understand, one didn't work, but 2. As I understand you, one didn't work, but 2 did.
Yeah, we had 2 lines. Correct. Okay. Is that it?
Sir, put us a nitrogen protocol when you're ready.
It should be soon. That is something that we're working on with the Attorney General's office, and it will be soon.
Any device in this?
I would say in the next 2 months, give or take, time. All right.
There was a lot of issue made about what happened in the previous executions. Barber's attorneys said they were quote-unquote botched. Are you satisfied with how your personnel carried out the procedure tonight?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They went through the Federal District Court, 11th Circuit, and the U.S. Supreme Court, and it was carried out extremely well.
Was there any statement by the victim's family?
Not to my knowledge.
So you would consider tonight's result a win for the department after all this remaining days after last year?
We carried out a successful execution of the inmate as directed by the Supreme Court.
For the month of August, there are 2 executions still scheduled. Joni A. Johnson from Missouri on August 1st and James Phillip Barnes from Florida on August 3rd. See you on Friday the 4th to give you the updates. There were 2 people executed in the month of August. Johnny A. Johnson, 45 years old, 18 years on death row, executed on August 1st by the state of Missouri. In St. Louis County, Johnson was found guilty of murdering 6-year-old Cassandra Casey Williamson by beating her to death on July 26, 2002. When he killed Casey, Johnson was 24 years old. He had been invited to spend the night on the couch of Casey's father's residence on Benton Street in Valley Park. In an abandoned glass factory's maze of tunnels, disused ovens, and underground rooms, Johnson led Casey away from the house and down the street. He eventually confessed to killing Casey with bricks and a large rock after she rejected his attempts toward intimate relations, according to the authorities. He cleaned himself up in the Merrimack River before going back to the Benton Street residence to get a pack of cigarettes. On August 1st, just before the execution, he submitted a handwritten letter of apology for his horrible deed. God bless. Sorry to the people and family I hurt. The U.S. Supreme Court recently dismissed an appeal to stop Johnson's execution, despite the defense team's claims that Johnson's illness prevented him from being mentally competent to face the capital penalty. Although Johnson had significant issues, according to a former prosecutor from St. Louis who saw the execution, he knew exactly what he was doing. A number of Casey's relatives witnessed Johnson's execution. For his last meal, he had a burger, curly fries, and a strawberry milkshake.
Fox 2's Mandy Murphy recently sat down with Casey's mom, Angie Weidman. She says Casey's brutal murder is something her family has carried for 21 years.
My father and my brother were the ones to identify Casey's body when it happened. And following that, my brother had a complete mental breakdown. And my father drank himself to death. It was more than either one of them could process, seeing Casey's little body in the way he left it.
She says these pictures are all she has left of her daughter.
James Phillip Barnes, 61 years old, 16 years on death row, executed on August 3rd by the state of Florida. Barnes was born on March 7, 1962. He has a twin sister named Janice and is one of 5 children. He felt Maryland was his home, but it is uncertain where he was actually born. Patricia Patsy Miller, a 41-year-old nurse from Melbourne, Florida, was home on April 20, 1988, when Barnes broke in. He entered Miller's house through a bedroom window, held her at knife point, and then essayed her. She was lying face down on the bed when he assaulted her with a hammer and then chained her with his shoelaces. Barnes attempted to cover up the crime by setting her bed on fire. He then left the scene. Miller had been killed before the fire began, according to a medical examiner's later findings. This murder went unsolved for a long time, as there was nothing to link Miller and Barnes. At her West Melbourne house on December 11, 1997, Barnes strangled his estranged wife, Linda Barnes, age 44. Barnes was subject to a restraining order against Linda as of December 2nd, which forbade him from approaching her or visiting her house. He murdered his wife, put her body in a closet, and stayed in the house. He was detained at the residence on December 12 by sheriff's deputies, and he was accused of killing Linda. Barnes admitted to murdering his wife on January 9, 1998, and was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole. While fasting during Ramadan in 2005, Barnes, who had converted to Islam, admitted to the unsolved murder of Patsy Miller. He confessed to the crime in a letter to the assistant state's attorney. Barnes had been questioned in the case in 1997 when DNA evidence was acquired that matched him. He did not, however, want to cooperate with police at the time. Until a grand jury returned an indictment, no charges were brought. Barnes explained to the prosecution that he wrote the letter to atone for his sins. In that letter, Barnes claimed, "I murdered her so there would be no witnesses or complaint against me." Barnes waived his right to a jury at his murder trial and chose to represent himself. He entered a guilty plea to Miller's first-degree murder, burglary, 2 counts of sexual battery with a weapon, and arson in 2006. He was given the death penalty by Brevard County Circuit Judge Lisa Davidson on December 13, 2007. In 2010, Barnes confessed to the unsolved murders of Chester Wetmore and Brenda Fletcher. He said that he first encountered Wetmore in 1988, characterizing him as a fugitive who was dependent on crack and crystal meth. Wetmore had been living on the streets for a while and was an escort. His disappearance had been reported on May 27, 1986. Wetmore allegedly broke into Barnes' car and took his possessions. In 1988, Barnes assassinated him by pursuing him and shooting him with a shotgun. Then he and 2 companions buried the corpse. Fletcher, according to Barnes, was a crack addict and a prostitute without a family. He demanded his driver's license back and accused her of stealing his wallet. In 1991, Barnes assassinated Fletcher after she refuted the accusations. On April 2, 1991, Fletcher's body was found in a drainage ditch in Brevard County that was flooded. The last time Fletcher had communication with a family member was on October 22, 1990, and she had been registered as missing at the time of her murder. On June 22, 2023, Governor Ron DeSantis signed Barnes' death warrant. At a hearing on June 27, 2023, Barnes adamantly stated that he did not want to put an end to his impending execution and that he wanted to take responsibility for his deeds and carry out his execution right away. At 61 years old, Barnes was pronounced dead at 6:13 p.m. on August 3rd, following a lethal injection at the Florida State Prison in Stark. When the curtain was lifted for the witnesses, Barnes was lying on a gurney with his eyes closed. When prison staff asked him if he had any final remarks, he remained silent for almost 10 minutes until his breathing ceased. He also refused his final meal.
There are other, there are other crimes out there that I've committed that I've never been held accountable for. There is no proper way to come forward and say how sorry one is or show remorse. They say I'm remorseless. I'm not. I have cried so many nights, so many days. I've spent so much time trying to figure out how to balance the scale. I just didn't see. I just didn't really understand the gravity of what this state would do to me, for coming forward and saying I'm sorry, and not offering anything other than, I'm responsible. This is what I've done. This is exactly how it happened. There is no more questions in this case. And now I'm going to be executed.
There is only one person scheduled for execution in September, and that is Anthony Sanchez. On September 21, 2023, at 10 a.m., the execution of Anthony Sanchez started. He spent 17 years on death row for the murder of Julie Baskin. Jewel Jean Baskin, sometimes known as Julie, had always envisioned herself as a ballerina. She was pursuing a bachelor's degree in dance while she was a student at the University of Oklahoma. Julie intended to start a dancing studio and instruct kids after she graduated from college. Julie spent the afternoon of December 19, 1996, with her friend Ryan James. They both worked together at the Oklahoma University golf course. After they finished work on that day, Julie went over to Ryan's grandparents' house. They made a trip to Walmart to have some of her photos developed. Next, they went back to Ryan's place at around 7 p.m. to have dinner, and then they watched a movie. Julie stayed there until 10 p.m., then left to hang out with some of her other friends, but not before making plans with Ryan to have lunch together the following day. Julie and her friends played Monopoly and exchanged Christmas presents. She said goodbye because she planned to return to her hometown the next day. Her college term had just come to a conclusion. Megan, a roommate, was with her. The following morning at 5 a.m., she promised Megan she would drive her to Will Rogers Airport. Megan and Julie made the decision to stay up all night. Around 2 a.m., they departed the friend's home and traveled to a restaurant named The Kettle. After finishing, Megan and Julie went to the gas station to get some gas and a cappuccino. A little after 3 in the morning, they went back to their flat. Around 4:30 a.m., the two left the apartment once more and made their way to the airport. They arrived after 30 minutes of travel. Megan watched Julie leave the airport after dropping her off while driving a Red Eagle Summit. Nobody would see or hear from Julie again after that. According to reports, Julie was well liked and had many friends from school. She had a lot of talent as well. A man who resided in the same apartment building as Julie made a 911 call around 5:30 in the morning. According to him, his wife and he had been sound sleeping when a really loud, awful scream could be heard coming from the parking lot. Also, he heard a man shouting, "Get in the car and shut up." Many of the neighbors claimed to have heard the same scream and seen a car leaving the site. For their scheduled lunch date, Ryan arrived at Julie's apartment hours later. Julie wasn't there, and neither was her car. To assist Julie with packing up her apartment, Julie's parents took a trip from their home in Arkansas to Oklahoma. Their daughter was reported missing when they arrived. Julie's body was discovered on the shore of a lake just 12 hours after she vanished. About 15 miles separated her residence from that lake. Shoelaces had been used to bind Julie's hands, which were tied behind her back. She had previously received one execution-style shot to the back of the head. Julie had also been essayed. A pink leotard was discovered about 20 feet away from her body, and there was evidence that her pants had been taken down. On the tag, there were Julie's initials. Genetic material from the leotard was submitted in for analysis. Additionally, the police discovered tracks on the red sand close to the lake. Some of the footprints were damaged because of the severe wind. Some of the shoe patterns could be captured in photos by the police. The sneakers were Nike Air 2 running shoes in size 9. Just a block from Julie's home, her Red Eagle Summit was discovered in the parking lot of an apartment building. The car contained the same red sand. It implied that after killing her, the murderer had driven the automobile to this large complex parking lot. Both Julie's cell phone and the ring that she wore constantly were reported missing. Records from her phone were examined. After Julie passed away, someone used her phone. The murderer dialed an out-of-service number and the weather forecast using the phone. The police got a call from a man who had spotted Julie's vehicle the night she died around a month into the investigation. He looked at a picture of the car and recognized it. The man claimed that a red car had cut him off as he was traveling close to the lake. He said he was furious about it, so he drove after the vehicle for around 5 miles. The man also collaborated with a forensic artist named Harvey Pratt. A young Hispanic man with long dark hair, possibly in his college years, was depicted in the drawing. The sketch was broadcasted to all news outlets and the media. The individual in the picture was unidentifiable, and Julie's case was left unsolved. About 4.5 years after Julie's murder, the next lead surfaced. A female prisoner at the Oklahoma County Jail dialed the police and made a call. She claimed to have seen the police sketch and recognized the man in it as Dennis, a former acquaintance of hers. Dennis, who lived about 4 blocks away from Julie, had previously worked in construction. The man adamantly refused to speak with the police or provide his DNA, but a court order was obtained and eventually it was analyzed. The DNA was said to be somewhat similar to the suspect's DNA, but it wasn't an exact match, and Dennis was eliminated as a potential suspect. The brother of Dennis was also investigated. Since Dennis's DNA was so similar to the one found on the leotard, the police thought that maybe a relative of his was the murderer. His only living relative was his brother, but he was also ruled out as a suspect. Antonio Sanchez was detained for the essay of his former girlfriend 6 years after Julie was murdered. Anthony had to give his DNA after being detained. The police interviewed his past partners and pals while they awaited the test results. In October 1996, a former girlfriend noted in her diary that Anthony had bought her some Nikes and had also bought a pair for himself. Therefore, it was established that Anthony owned a size 9 pair of Nike Air 2 sneakers. Anthony had a peculiar habit, according to another girlfriend of his who had lived with him. He would frequently shoot with his father. They had 22mm firearms in the house. A warrant was obtained for that house, and when they tore down the walls and employed an X-ray machine, the cops were unsuccessful in their search for anything. The landlord, however, entered the house to clean up after the cops had departed. A .22 bullet was located by the landlord. The bullet had identical distinctive grooves as the bullet that had been discovered at the crime site. Additionally, Anthony's DNA and the DNA detected on Julie's leotard matched. He was detained and accused of killing her. Anthony was 18 years old when Julie was killed. He was a well-known thief who had resided approximately a mile away from Julie. The police believed that Anthony had been out on December 20th robbing random cars of Christmas gifts. Anthony observed Julie when she approached her house after dropping off her friend at the airport. At gunpoint, Julie was kidnapped and told to take the car to the lake. Then Anthony killed Julie after assaulting her. His DNA, footprints, and attempt to make a call to one of his ex-girlfriends from Julie's phone were all left behind. He had been off by 1 digit, which accounted for the call going to an out-of-service number. Anthony received a death sentence after being found guilty of murder in 2006. The College of Fine Arts at the University of Oklahoma had established a dance scholarship in Julie's honor. Sanchez has always maintained his innocence, and he did it once again in a phone call from death row to the Associated Press earlier this year. He said that his father was the one who actually murdered Julie, and that he had confessed several times to the crime before ending his own life. Charlotte Beatty, Sanchez's father's former girlfriend, said Thomas Glenn Sanchez told her a few times about how he had to hogtie Baskin because she squealed. She added that after he finished the job with her, he just shot her in the head. She told the authorities that she had been worried about coming forward beforehand as she feared she would suffer the same fate if she did. Sanchez also said that the DNA match was fabricated and that he did not have a size shoe 9 but 11, and that the footprints on the scene were not his. After multiple appeals, his last chance was to ask for clemency, which he refused to do, saying that he saw no reason to beg for his life when he did not commit the crime. Following a 3-drug injection at the McAlester, Oklahoma facility of the Oklahoma State Penitentiary, Anthony Sanchez, 44 years old, was declared dead at 10:19 a.m. His last words were, "I'm innocent. I didn't kill nobody." His last meal was chicken fried steak, fried okra, mashed potatoes, apple pie and ice cream, hot roll, and sweet iced tea. Sanchez is the third inmate put to death in Oklahoma this year and the 10th since the state resumed carrying out the death penalty in 2021. 2 people were executed in the month of October. Michael Zack, Florida, October 3rd. Zack received the death penalty for killing Ravone Smith on June 13, 1996. Before his crime, he lived in Tallahassee, Florida. He made friends with Edith Pope, a bartender, and started going to the bar frequently. Zack disclosed in a series of conversations that he saw his sister use an axe to kill his mother. Pope felt sorry for Zack and assigned him odd duties around the bar. Zack's girlfriend called him at the bar on June 4, 1996, to let him know that he was getting kicked out of her apartment. Zack never came back after Pope let him use her car to get his personal stuff. He traveled to Panama City in the West, where he went to a neighborhood bar and met Bobby Chandler. Zack was employed by Chandler, a local construction company owner. Chandler offered to let Zack stay with him temporarily after learning that Zack was living out of Pope's stolen Honda. Zack stole $42 from Chandler's wallet and a few firearms from his residence on June 11, 1996, during the night. The next day, he pawned the firearms in Nissville. He made a stop at another bar before driving to Okaloosa County. He met Laura Rosillo there. Zack and Rosillo went to the beach to use drugs after leaving the bar together. Zack attacked her at that beach. He ripped her clothes as he struck her head against one of the tires. Before disappearing, Zack kicked dirt over her face, he strangled her, and concealed her body behind a sand dune. Rosillo may have been essayed based on the physical evidence, but Zack could not be connected to the genetic material found at the scene. Zack went to Joe's Dirty Bar, which is close to Pensacola. He got to know one of the bartenders, Ravone Smith, there. She was able to spend her time chatting with Zack because the pub wasn't too busy that afternoon. Smith was bored, so she called her friend Russell Williams and invited him to the pub. Zack, Smith, and Williams all exited the bar together. Smith told her live-in partner over the phone before she left that she would be working late. After driving to the beach and smoking some Mary Jane, the three went back to the bar. Following Williams' departure, Zack and Smith went to her residence. Zack gave Smith a beer bottle blow to the head as soon as he got inside the residence. Blood spattered across the inside of the door frame and the sofa next to it, along with broken glass fragments. With a trail of blood in her wake, Smith rushed to the master bedroom down the hall. Zack followed her there, where he essayed her. Smith then stumbled into the guest bedroom, and Zack hit her head hard on the wood floor. At this moment, Zack went to the kitchen to get an oyster knife, came back to the guest bedroom, and stabbed Smith 4 times in the chest. He shoved Smith's bloody garments into a dresser drawer and returned the knife to the kitchen to clean it. Along with Smith's purse, VCR, and television, he also took her car. That evening, Zack took the license plates off of Pope's stolen Honda and left it in a neighboring parking lot along with a few personal items. After that, he took Smith's vehicle back to Panama City and tried to pawn a number of the stolen goods. The store employee asked Zack for identification because she thought the merchandise might be stolen. Zack left Smith's car behind and ran out of the store. A few days later, he was discovered hiding out in an abandoned house and was taken into custody. He admitted to the Pope and Chandler thefts as well as the death of Ravone Smith after being apprehended. Zack's defense attorney claimed during the trial that Zack had PTSD and fetal alcohol syndrome, 2 conditions that are categorized as mental impairments and brain dysfunctions. On October 3rd, the day of the execution, Zack got up at 5:30 a.m. and had meetings with his wife, Ann Kristen, and his spiritual advisor later in the day. Family was present outside the prison during the execution, but his wife was not allowed to witness it. The procedure started promptly at 6 p.m. on October 3, 2023. Zack was asked if he had any last words, and he answered, "Yes, sir." He then lifted his head to look at the witnesses and said, "I love you all." The drugs were administered at 6:02 p.m. and he was pronounced dead at 6:14 p.m. Although there was no visible signs of breathing after the first minute, he declined the last meal. Jedediah Murphy, Texas, October 10th. At gunpoint, Murphy coerced a 79-year-old white woman into giving him a ride in Garland on October 4, 2000. He forced the victim into the car's trunk after they had been riding for roughly 30 minutes. While getting into the trunk, the victim was shot. The deceased was taken out of the trunk and drowned in a creek after Murphy took the victim's car to Van Zandt County. Later on, Murphy bought cigarettes and alcohol with the victim's credit cards. Murphy, 48 years old, was put to death with a lethal injection at the state penitentiary in Huntsville, Texas on October 10th. With his right hand on Murphy's chest, a Christian pastor prayed for the victim's family, Murphy's family and friends, and the prisoner as he lay strapped to a gurney in the death chamber. His last words were, "To the family of the victim, I sincerely apologize for all of it. I hope this helps, if possible, give you closure." He then recited Psalm 34 and said, "The Lord redeems the soul of his servants, and none of those who trust in him shall be condemned." After telling the warden he was ready, Murphy turned his head towards a friend watching through a window a few feet from him, telling her, "God bless all of y'all. It's okay. Tell my babies I love them." Then he shouted, "Bella is my wife." The pastor stood over him, his left hand over Murphy's heart, until a doctor entered the room about 20 minutes later to examine Murphy and declare him dead at 10:15 p.m. local time, 25 minutes after the drug was administered. Murphy appeared to go to sleep as the lethal dose of pentobarbital took effect. In a written statement, Murphy said, "I wake up to my crime daily, and I've never gone a day without sincere remorse for the hurt I've caused." He also had a long history of mental illness. He was abused as a child and was in and out of foster care. October 10th was also the 21st World Day Against the Death Penalty, a day recognized by the United Nations and Amnesty International. There was no special final meal granted since he was executed by the state of Texas. In October, a third scheduled execution was stayed just 5 hours before it had to be carried out. William Spear, who is on death row for strangling an inmate in prison, committed his first murder when he was just 16 years old. At that time, he killed the father of a friend, suspecting the man was abusive towards his friend. There were 3 people executed in the month of November. Brent Brewer, 53 years old, 32 years on death row. Brewer was found guilty of capital murder and given the death penalty by a Randall County jury in June 1991 for the 66-year-old Robert Doyle Laminak's stabbing death in 1990. Laminak was asked for a ride to the Salvation Army by Brewer and his co-defendant Christy Lynn Nystrom, 43 years old, when Brewer fatally stabbed Laminak. Before being apprehended, the duo snatched Laminak's wallet, which contained just $140 in cash. A jury also found Nystrom guilty of capital murder and gave her a life sentence. Although he had been given a death sentence at first, that decision was overturned in 2007 and he was given a life term instead. Yet in 2009, Brewer was back in court for a new trial and sentence. James Farron, the district attorney for Randall County, requested the death penalty a second time, and the jury upheld his request. Even though an expert witness's methods were questioned and one of Brewer's jurors pleaded for his life to be spared, Brewer's clemency appeal was denied. At 6:23 p.m. on November 9, Brewer received a fatal injection of pentobarbital. After 15 minutes, he was dead. He snorted multiple times, he gasped twice, and then took a few quiet breaths as the medication started to take effect. Everything stopped moving after 30 seconds. Brewer had claimed to be a model prisoner with no violent past and to have made an effort to improve himself by taking part in a religiously based program for death row convicts. Additionally, he had long professed regret for the murder and the need to make amends with Laminak's family. His last statement was, "I would like to tell the family of the victim that I could never figure out the words to fix what I have broken. I just want you to know that this 53-year-old is not the same reckless 19-year-old kid from 1990. I hope you find peace. Texas does not offer special last meals, so he did not have one. David Renteria, 54 years old, 20 years on death row. On November 18, 2001, Renteria kidnapped a 5-year-old Hispanic girl from El Paso, Texas. He choked her to death and then burned her body. At around 5:15 p.m., a store video camera caught the victim leaving the building with an unidentified male. Her parents realized she was missing very soon, but she was nowhere to be found on the store premises. Her body was discovered on November 19, 2001, around 7 a.m. At the scene of the crime and from the victim's person, tangible evidence and latent prints were gathered. An autopsy found that manual strangulation was the cause of death. Just before Renteria's execution, his attorneys filed a late appeal alleging that the El Paso District Attorney's Office had violated his constitutional rights by neglecting to provide case materials. However, the motion was dismissed by the U.S. Supreme Court. Other legal actions were unsuccessful in stopping the planned execution. At 7 p.m. on November 16th, Renteria received a fatal injection of pentobarbital. 11 minutes later, he passed away. After witnesses, including the relatives of his victim, entered the death chamber and peered through a window a few meters from him, Renteria sang a song in Spanish, then prayed with a spiritual advisor standing next to him. After that, he sang another hymn in English. Then the medicine started coming in, and he started reciting the Lord's Prayer. It ended with, "Our Father who art in heaven." He said, "I taste it," about the medicine. He inhaled loudly twice, snored twice before coming to a complete halt. His last statement was, "There is not a day that goes by that I do not think about the fateful events of that day and what transpired. There are no words to describe what you're going through, and I understand that. To my family, I love you. To my family out there and my brothers on death row or on life row, I love you. To the people who have shown compassion and who have been there for me, you are my true family, and I have been pleased. Let everyone know I am sorry for all the wrongs that I have done. For those who called for my death and transgressed against me and want me murdered, I forgive you. I truly do. I don't know what else to say. To my family, I'm good. I'm strong. Just know that I'm going to be okay. I'm good. I love you all. I love you all. I truly do. I will see you all in the other world. I'm ready, Warden. Send me home." He did not have a special last meal. Casey McWhorter, 49 years old, 29 years on death row. Edward Lee Williams Sr. was attacked and killed by Casey McWhorter. At the time of the crime, McWhorter was 3 months over the legal age of 18, according to the prosecution. He plotted with 2 other younger teens, one of whom was Williams's 15-year-old son, to steal money and other items from Williams's home before killing him. McWhorter and Minor, according to the prosecution, went to the Williams's house with rifles and built homemade silencers out of a pillow and a milk jug. Upon reaching home and seeing the teenagers, the elder Williams seized the weapon that Minor was holding. After they struggled over it, McWhorter shot Williams first. Williams was shot 11 times in all. The younger teens, Edward Lee Williams Jr. and Daniel Minor, who was 16 years old, were sentenced to life in prison. On November 16th at 6:30 p.m., prison officials raised the curtain to reveal the execution room. At the start of the procedure, McWhorter, tied to the gurney with the IV lines already in place, moved slightly and rubbed his fingers together, but his respiration slowed until it was invisible. His final statement was, "I would like to say I love my mother and family. I would like to say to the victim's family, I'm sorry. I hope you find peace." In his last remarks, McWhorter also seemed to be taking a verbal shot at the jail warden, who had been accused of domestic abuse decades earlier, stating, "It is not lost on me that a habitual abuser of women is carrying out this procedure." His last meal was Turtles candies, a chocolate, pecan, and caramel concoction. Alabama intends to use nitrogen gas to execute Kenneth Eugene Smith in January, making the first attempt in the history of the country. Although Alabama, Oklahoma, and Mississippi have legalized nitrogen hypoxia as a means of execution, no state has yet employed it. Phillip Hancock, 59 years old, 19 years on death row in the state of Oklahoma for the April 2001 killings of motorcycle gang members Robert Jett and James Lynch. He had received a death sentence. For a long time, he has maintained that he shot and murdered James Lynch, 58 years old, and Robert Jett Jr., 37 years old, in self-defense after the two men attacked him inside Jett's South Oklahoma City house. His defenders argue that Hancock, who was unarmed, was lured to Jett's house by Jett. According to a female witness, before hitting Hancock with a metal rod, Jett gave him the order to enter a cage. Hancock allegedly shot Jett and Lynch after they attacked him, stealing Jett's weapon in the process. Hancock was found guilty of first-degree manslaughter in a different shooting incident that occurred in 1982, despite his claim that he was acting in self-defense at that time also. He served less than 3 years in a 4-year sentence for that case as well. An hour before Hancock's execution, Governor Kevin Stitt rejected the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board's recommendation to grant him clemency. Since January 2019, Stitt has only once granted clemency, changing Julius Jones's death sentence to life in prison without the possibility of parole on November 18, 2021. Having made the choice just 4 hours before the planned execution, he faced some criticism. 2 other death row prisoners, Bigler Stauffer and James Coddington, have received favorable clemency recommendations since Stitt took office. The governor did not accept those recommendations. On November 30th, the execution did not start until after 11 a.m. The death row convict had ordered fried chicken the previous evening, dark meat without any sides, as his final meal. Inside the execution chamber, Hancock expressed gratitude to his legal team and maintained his claim that the killings were carried out in self-defense while strapped to the gurney. He also said he hoped one day he will be exonerated. Hancock's execution was the last scheduled for 2023. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.